Peter Mattei and Peter Tolan. Let's talk about your new show, Outsiders. Peter Mattei, I want to start with you. You created the show. Where did this idea come from?
Uh, you know, I was just been thinking a lot about the sort of the times that we live in and the basic conflicts, the things that are angering people. People seem really angry, and a lot of people feel like their freedom is being taken from them, and that they're in somehow that their lifestyle is endangered and so on. And I started thinking about how you could portray something like that in a rather extreme way. And always been interested in Appalachia and always loved the music and everything from there, and the culture from there. And I started thinking about a clan of mountain people that really live in a very pre-modern way. I think a lot about technology and where that's taken us. I think everybody does. And I just thought, well, what if there is a group of people that really live in a completely different way and are quite happy living that way? And what would happen if the modern world started to impinge on their lifestyle, and what would they do?
Mm-hmm. What surprised me a lot about the first episode was how dense it is. There's a lot going on in there. So can you talk about developing it and creating the story?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote it originally on spec, and I didn't really think too much about things like act breaks and things like that, and I just sort of packed it full of everything that I kind of wanted to be in there. And then as we developed it, we clarified some things, but we were conscious not to sort of leave it a little bit chaotic. The show it's got its own sort of wild quality to it, and so we didn't want it to conform too much to simple structures. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It is kind of like its own animal, and we did a lot of work on it. In fact, we really did a lot of reshooting, and I did a lot of rewriting on the script and everything. But we kind of made sure that it was weird.
Right. So Peter Tolan, how did you get involved with this show?
My company has a deal at Sony, Fedora Entertainment, and every now and then, not too often, they give me scripts that come across that they think I might be interested in, and I usually say no, because I'm mostly fascinated by my own work. So, but I read this script and I just thought it was really wonderful, and I really, unlike most scripts, I could actually visualize the world, what it was going to look like, at least part of it. And I say that in a very broad sense. But it really came alive and was weird and different and compelling, and I got on board.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have quite a long career in television. Read off some of your credits here. You co-created Rescue Me with Dennis Leary. You wrote for Larry Sanders, Murphy Brown, Home Improvement, Ellen. You've written several movies for Harold Ramis. So talk about what your role on this show is. You're one of the writers and executive producers, so what does that job entail?
I think I figured out over the years that especially even starting back from Larry Sanders, there's usually somebody smarter than me involved, or has a better sense of, or has a really great idea. I don't usually come up with great ideas. I'm usually somebody who comes in after somebody else has had a great idea and just sort of facilitates getting that idea done, or expanding on it, or helping to bring it to life beyond the initial thought process of it. So I've done that actually quite a few times, and I know that early on when we were doing this last season, when we were doing Outsiders, I remember one conversation where Peter said to me, "Well, how do you do this?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean this?" And he said, "Well, make more of them. Just the pilot." So I think that's what I do. I think I'm pretty good at figuring out how to make more of them.
Mm-hmm. You brought up the reading the script and being able to see the setting in your mind, and I think that's something that's really great about this show, is that it has a real what's the word, authenticity to it, or a real sense of place.
Yeah.
You know. So Peter Mattei, what kind of research did you do in order to create this world?
Well, before I go into that, I just want to say that when Peter was very kind, and when he said that usually when he works on something, there's someone smarter than him, and he was very kind to not then say that was not the case.
Usually, yes, right.
Because I felt from the very beginning of this project that I was suddenly thrust into a working environment for the first time in my life in which I really felt like every single person was smarter than me, which was quite a relief, I have to say. But in terms of the authenticity of the show, you know, it's obviously the Farrell clan are a made-up, fantastical bunch. They don't exist anywhere in the world. They're really a product of our imaginations. I did do some research about mountaintop removal and so on in West Virginia, and read a lot and saw a lot of documentaries about that and about Appalachia in general to try to get some, you know, as much authenticity as we can get, you know. But that said, and thank you for saying that it feels authentic. That said, you know, it is a made-up world, and we've set it in a fictional county and a fictional town and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Some of the most fascinating moments in it, too, are the culture clash, you know, within it. I think about it in the first episode, you know, they're coming down on their big dune buggies, and they're riding through the supermarket, just grabbing things and taking them, and the people down there are just kind of befuddled by it and just leave it be. You know, can you talk a bit about that culture clash there and portraying that?
Yeah, well, the culture clash is really what the show is about on every level. You know, the Farrells kind of represent maybe some sort of like fantastic notion of freedom and what freedom is. They represent a pre-modern, pre-technological society. They also represent a kind of like pre-capitalist society because they don't have money and they don't believe in money. They just sort of live off the land and give each other what they need because they're one big family. And then I think that I'm looking at the other culture as being something that is a kind of extreme version of America today, in which, you know, big, huge corporations and wealthy people kind of have all the assets, and the rest of the people are left to fight over the scraps, you know. So times are really tough in the town of Blackbird. People need jobs, and they see the mining of the Farrell's Mountain, Shea Mountain, as being the answer to their economic woes. And so the clash is, you know, it's cultural, it's spiritual on some level in terms of their beliefs, and it's very deeply rooted in economics.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a bit about the cast. First of all, David Morse, who headlines this thing. What made him perfect for this role?
Well, that's a good question. I have always loved David and thought he was great. And in my very original pitch to the network, when they were saying, what kind of actors do you see in these different roles, I had him right at the top as being the kind of actor that I really wanted to work with. You know, somebody that is really, really devoted to his craft, who really disappears into a role completely, and that you would believe would be this kind of a mountain guy. And so, you know, we were lucky to get David interested. And then working with him was great because he brought a level of humanity and groundedness and so on to a character who could have easily been, you know, kind of a lunatic cliche in the hands of a lesser actor. So, you know, we were really lucky on a lot of levels with him.
Yeah, you bring that up. That was the point I was going to make, was that, I mean, it's so easy to kind of think of these characters as just like backwater hicks or one-dimensional kind of people, but there is a nuance to them that I think is really interesting.
We had conversations early on where we all knew that showing a bunch of hillbillies, toothless hillbillies on the side of a mountain wouldn't be that interesting. Nor would like models on a mountain. We didn't want to get really good-looking people pretending to be the people up there. So we had to sort of split the difference and find some. Obviously, we had specific needs, especially with the character of Gwyn. But we always talked about the fact that they had some sort of honor to them, and so, for example, in the pilot, when they take all the stuff from the big box store during their raid, they also leave something behind. They put a little carving there or whatever, and it's part of their barter thing. So they're not just criminals. They do have a code, and they do have some honor as a people. So we were always careful to maintain that.
Mm-hmm. So talk about rounding out the rest of the ensemble. I mean, there's a lot of really terrific actors in this show. How long did the process of casting take?
It felt like a long time. We were in the room for many, many times, and there were a lot of people who were interested, but we were looking for some very specific types. So, obviously Ryan Hurst is somebody who looks like he belongs on that mountain,
Mm-hmm.
And so he was a great find for Little Foster. We wanted to get, some of this is calculated in the face of maybe an interesting project that not everybody's going to take to. So when we were, Peter had created the story of Hassel and Sally Ann, so that was very careful casting there. And, we wanted to find a guy that I think women would respond to, and we got Kyle Gallner, and Kyle has been great. And obviously, like I said, Jillian Alexi has a tall order because, frankly, now especially, but in the first season too, she's really the only woman who's a main character, So a lot sort of rests on her. And she had a perfect mix. First of all, she's a very good actress, but she was certainly attractive enough, but also had a little bit of an exotic look that makes you think that she could have been from up on the mountain. So some of these we got lucky,
Right,
and
absolutely.
Also, I had been a fan of Thomas Wright's from his work in a series called Top of the Lake. And when he expressed interest, we were, I was just really, really excited about that, and spoke to him a couple times via Skype, and we originally, I think, thought of the character of Sheriff Houghton as being older, but Thomas just brought such a kind of a real quality to the guy that was just kind of amazing. He's just a real force on the camera. Like the camera just he just transforms into something incredibly real and authentic in front of the camera.
And I remember when we were casting, there was a piece of tape on Thomas from The Bridge, the FX show, right? And I don't think I'd ever been in a casting situation where I was so just won over by one piece of tape. It was just weird and real, and it felt very natural, and it was. I just never forgot him from that point on. In my mind, he was the character from that point on.
Mm-hmm. So we talked earlier about the setting. I want to go back to that a bit and just ask. The compound that these people live on is so fascinating in terms of art direction and design. So where do you guys talk about finding the perfect forest location for this, and about building these houses or these homes for these people? What were your ideas like?
We had a very specific need here because we need actually two things. We need a mountaintop, or something that can double as a mountaintop, but we also need an Appalachian coal town. And that was a challenge early on in terms of going someplace where we could find both of those things, and also have it be suitable for production. That there'd be a crew and all that sort of stuff. So we got, after a lot of searching, we ended up in Pittsburgh, where we have this little town called Millvale, which is 5 minutes from downtown Pittsburgh, and then then we have our mountaintop, which is about 25 minutes west of town. So everything is sort of there. Everything that we need is there, and Peter can probably talk about the actual building of the mountaintop site. There were some challenges there.
What were those, Peter Mattei?
I'm sorry, he was totally breaking up. What was the? I couldn't.
I said in the building of the actual compound.
Oh, there were challenges in the building of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there were challenges in every aspect of the design and so on of the show because, the Farrells they're a completely unique group. There's nothing else like them in Appalachia or anywhere else. So every single decision that we had to make about their wardrobe and about how they lived and everything, we had to sort of invent from scratch. So, we would say, for example, that, I would say that the Farrells are part hillbilly clan, they're part gypsy tribe, and they're part hippie commune. And we would sort of play with these different elements. So if you look at the compound and the architecture of the compound, some of it is, classic sort of Appalachian architecture, the way cabins are built and so on. Some of it is really like we riffed on certain sort of like hippie communes from the 70s, all sort of DIY construction and stuff. We looked at outsider art, folk art and things like that to sort of give it a little inspiration. So we were just sort of like, everything's a mashup of all kinds of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And our production designer, Jonathan Carlson, did an amazing job of bringing these structures to life, and also our costume designer, Sarah Beers.
Absolutely. So Peter Mattei, I want to talk a bit about your background and how you arrived at Outsiders. You've written plays, you've written scripts for television, you directed a movie called Love in the Time of Money that was produced through the Sundance Lab and was nominated for a Gotham Award. Talk a bit about how all of that led up to this.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of different things. I've also published a novel, and I'm a bit of a dilettante. I just try lots of different things. I had written 6 or 7 original pilots for different networks, cable and otherwise, over the years, and gotten after a while a little bit disenchanted with the entire process, and just sort of took a few years away from it. And this particular idea really wouldn't, it's just one of those things that I just kept thinking about it all the time. And finally I just decided that I just needed to write it and get it out of my system. And I thought, well, maybe it should be a movie, or maybe it's like a big George R.R. Martin type book or something like that. Well, that would take me 10 years, and the movie would take me, a year to write. But a pilot is only 50 pages, so that's probably going to take less time. So I just wrote the pilot as quickly as possible. I mean, I'm kind of being facetious because, in fact, I was, we really are in such an amazing time for television, and I realized that the thing really could exist as this large kind of novelized thing that could take place, over many, many, many episodes. So it did feel like it wanted to be a television series from the beginning. So I just wrote it as a spec pilot, and I just jammed everything into it that I thought was cool and weird, and just made it as weird as possible, and sent it to my agent, and I said, no one will ever buy this, but I had fun writing it, enjoy reading it, and that's how it started.
And lo and behold, someone did. Where do you see the show? I know you guys are in the process of working on the second season right now, and there are a lot of opportunities for new things. So what can we kind of expect from the second season? You don't have to spoil anything, but
I think that we can expect, a lot of the things that people have come to enjoy about the show, but everything kicked up a notch. I think, you know, a lot more of the sort of weirdness of the Ferals, a lot more conflict with the other world, and you know, just more of our characters. Also, I'm going to say a lot of big surprises, a lot of things I think that people aren't going to see coming, which obviously that's all I can say about them.
Right. So Peter Tolan, I wanted to ask you, you've been nominated for several Emmys, and you've won 2, one for comedy series for Murphy Brown, and one for writing the last episodes of Larry Sanders,
Yeah.
which you shared with the late, great Gary Shandling.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask, first of all, what that kind of recognition means for you, and second, if you could just talk a bit about Mr. Shandling and working with him and his legacy.
When I started in television, I actually wanted to win the Best Writer Award for comedy. I really did. I mean, I had a very specific goal that I said to myself, I want to be in that club of those people who won that specific award. And the first Emmy I won was for producing Murphy Brown, but honestly, I didn't really do that much work. So it was sort of my phony Emmy. You know, it was I didn't really feel like I'd done the thing to deserve it. And I got nominated for many, many times over the course of the next couple of years, and many times for Larry Sanders, never won. So when I finally won, it was like, oh, that's great, and it was a fun story, and that's it. And then I just said, okay, now I don't care anymore, and I stopped. I think back then I may have put myself up for a couple of like Writers Guild awards, and I went to those ceremonies, and you know, the worst thing in the world you can do is give writers an open mic. So those Writers Guild awards are like the longest nights of your life. So I went twice. It was a fool me twice thing, and I never put my work up for it again. I never did. I really, you know, Dennis and I think, won a Humanitas award, which really is an indication of the end of show business. If the two of us can win a Humanitas, that's wrong. After I got that second Emmy, I didn't care anymore, and I really don't. I went from extreme focus and really wanting it to then doing it and not caring anymore. And then and Shandling was, you know, he was just a fascinating guy. I never figured him out. I was honored that the thing that he wanted to do with that show, I understood like immediately, and that's why we were always close. In fact, several weeks after he died, I went through my email and I found an email from him from a year ago, maybe less, where he said these lovely things, and I didn't even remember reading this email, but it said, you know, the Sanders Show is really your success as much as mine, and you're the only person I would ever want to write with again. And I'm just like, wow, why didn't I read this before? He was a lovely guy, and a mass of contradictions. You know, he could be lovely that way and amazingly self-involved. You know, he and neurotic and all those things, but also very spiritual, very sweet. You know, just it's a big loss.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much, and congratulations on the show, and thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Well, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you, Peter.